So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kai, and I'm the communication coordinator with Idaho Partners for Good. Most of you know what Idaho Partners for Good is, but we are a nonprofit that's based in Boise, Idaho. And our goal is that together we invest our human and financial capital in Idaho nonprofits with the desire and ability for outsized community impact. I like to say that we are kind of the in-between, and we are the support system for other nonprofits so that those nonprofits can really thrive and help our families, community, and individuals in the Boise area. And we are hoping to expand further within the state. Today we have Kendal Tucker with us, and she is going to be leading our breakthrough series today. She has over 30 years of experience working with women, children, and families in various settings, such as special needs preschool teacher, children's mental health treatment manager, adoption program coordinator, licensed clinical professional counselor, and public speaker. So we are so thrilled that she's with us today, and I can't wait to see what she has in store. So Kendal, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and welcome to all that are here. It's an honor, and I'm excited. I want to hopefully be able to share some expertise, but obviously share some things that are in my heart as well. A little tiny bit about me. Been married to a wonderful man. We're going on 42 years, going strong. And we have 2 adult children. My daughter, Abby, is 38, I think. She is a pediatric ICU nurse and also the clinical educational director for the PICU unit here at the Children's Hospital. And I'm very, very proud of her and all the work she does, especially nowadays, what's going on. And my son, he's 36, Luke, and he is a vice president of a cybersecurity company that actually is based out of Tel Aviv, Israel. And thankfully, he gets to work remote, and we get to enjoy he and his family a lot. So they live here as well. And as any grandparent will say, is I have amazing grandchildren. I have 5 of them, and literally they all are just so precious to Leroy and I, to my husband and I. And I am humbled and honored and very thankful for such a rich family. So let's get with it. The learning objectives, and I know those have probably already been broadcasted, but I think defining what we're talking about is very important. That's foundational to what I do. Is I want a little bit of a foundation of education and understanding. So we define what it is that we're talking about so that we're on the same page. Obviously gaining awareness and understanding how does adversity impact us individually. And I will interchange words like adversity, difficulties, hardship, maybe even trauma. So those are kind of interspersed together. But we need to kind of learn about how do those impact us and how does resiliency help us withstand these difficulties. And then the goal obviously would be to apply learn and apply tools and strategies on how do we implement resiliency in our everyday life, no matter what type of difficulty we're experiencing, because obviously difficulties, there's a range. But a difficulty is a difficulty. If I'm having a difficult time, if I'm in the midst of hardship, then it might look different for someone else, but we never compare because it's how we're experiencing it. So here's the definition. It's the ability to withstand adversity while bouncing back from the difficulties. Resilience gives us the opportunity to have the emotional strength to cope with hardship as well as adapt to the difficulties. And pardon me for a minute, because I'm going to move my screen over just a little bit here because it's blocking my words. Sorry. So here we go. Bounce back, withstand, cope, and adapt. That's resilience. Resilience doesn't, if I'm a resilient person, it doesn't take me out of the difficulty I'm in. It's not like a magic ticket out. It's a way through. And just by looking at the term bouncing back, that means I feel like I've gotten knocked down. And with resilience, I'm able to bounce back. And sometimes some of us feel like we've been knocked down and we got to get back up, and knocked down, and we got to get back up, and knocked down. If we're not resilient, it's a hard time, we have a hard time bouncing back. So let's go to the next one. Hold on. Oops, sorry. There we go. Difficulty. The definition would be setbacks, losses. For example, maybe getting fired. I've had someone in my office, unfortunately, that had their home burned down. That's a difficulty. That's a loss. It's a hardship. It creates opportunity to be resilient. Adversity. My definition, but it's press beyond measure. Feeling even sometimes despairing of life. Hardship, pressure, oppression, stress, distress. And then trauma, which is an experience that we either witness or we experience ourselves that threatens our emotional safety, our physical safety, or even our life. That, even if it's happened 20 years ago, it's still a trauma memory for us, and it can be triggered at times. So this is where we need resilience. If we don't have any of these things, then the need for resilience isn't there. There are some types of resilience. There's a psychological resilience. It's the ability to withstand mentally. It's the ability to adapt. It's, I guess, what you would call mental fortitude. It gives me the opportunity to be able to be calm and focused, even in the midst of a crisis, without having long-term negative consequences. The emotional component. Now, understand, I would venture to say most, if not all, people have a hard time. They don't want to talk about emotions. They don't want to talk about feelings. And I am a licensed counselor. I'm not here to counsel you, but I feel that being able to identify as well as express our emotions and understanding what do I feel and why is a critical component to be able to have emotional resilience. Physical resilience, it's the ability to recover when we're faced with some sort of illness or a medical issue. And I am going to interject here and use a personal example, and I want to just clarify that it's mainly for application of the things that we will talk about for this next few minutes. So I am going to make a very long story and make it short. And years ago, I had a very standard procedure of an operation that many, many women have. And unfortunately, the doctor botched the surgery. And so in a time span of about, I believe it was about 8 to 9 years, I had 7 surgeries to try and repair what was done, what was the mistake, the botch. So each surgery, I kept thinking, this is a repair, and I'm gonna feel better. So I had hopes, I had expectation, and then more pain, more discomfort, more problems, and back down to discouraged and some feelings of despair. So after each surgery, I keep thinking, oh, this is gonna get better, this is gonna get better, and it didn't. And so what that does to the human psyche is finally it just gets to the point where it's very difficult to manage. So it's learning how do you learn to function in the midst of those difficulties, and we'll discuss some of that. The next one is community. Sorry, my little buncher is tricky. Community. We can all relate to this no matter where we are in the world. To recover from natural disasters, or for instance, a pandemic. I almost said panic, but that would kind of go with pandemic. And how it impacts our community, and how does it impact our people, our coworkers, our family, our neighbors. And we all know how that is. Every one of us would have stories of that. And so how do we gather together to build resilience, to help each other? with those types of unfortunate things. One of the questions I would ask everyone is, do you think people are just born resilient and some aren't? So some are lucky and some aren't. How many would say you're born with it? How many would say it's nurture? In other words, it can be developed and learned. How many would say it's both? Ding, ding, right? Kind of no duh. But I think we need to make sure that's hopeful. That yes, some have the propensity to be resilient more than others. But the good news is, yes, it can be learned and it can be nurtured as well. You know, we look at all animal species, and there's tons of animal species I could have picked, but I don't know why I picked a camel. It's a nice picture, I guess. And even plant species. When you think about plants that were in one part of the world, and you know, back in the day, they put them on a ship and then they moved to a different part of the world and planted those plants. Those plants learned to adapt and become resilient to the environment and the hardships that it produced. And even animals, camels, I always thought it was water in those humps, but obviously it's fat and it was made for survival. So their ability to be resilient with extreme hardship, whether it's hot or cold. And I just thought it was kind of interesting. They can survive without eating or drinking for months. That's pretty good resilience. Cockroaches. I know it's a word pick, but I'm a Colorado girl. So I really didn't know much about cockroaches, hadn't heard much about them. I don't even think I ever saw one. But then in the course of life, my husband and I ended up living in Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica, which not the tourist part, it was the third world part. And I saw cockroaches that were this big. They were huge and they had wings. So I learned a lot about those, but I never knew that they actually survived an atomic blast. That's what I would call being pretty resilient. Interesting fact, if they can survive without air for 30 minutes. I don't know why they need to survive, because we don't like them. And they can actually survive without their head for a week. And interesting, the only reason why they die is they can't get water. So it's just, we look at, you know, even again, all around us in nature, there's resilience. We must remember, we as humans are hardwired for survival. It's in us. Now, I will say that when COVID hit, multiple people that I talk to on a daily basis, weekly basis, who were bewildered, uncertain, confused, scared, just not knowing what's going to happen. What is this? What does life look like? As you and we all know. And I remember telling people, and I think it's so important, dig deep, because you're stronger than you think. I believe all were created. We have this reservoir of strength. It's just deep. And for some of us, if we haven't experienced a difficulty or hardship, for instance, like COVID, we've never needed to draw on it. So we might not even realize it's there. And I would encourage people, dig deeper. That strength is there because we are stronger than you think. So we are hardwired for survival, and it's there, and it can be developed. It's an ongoing process. It's not a set place of being resilient. It's not 1, 2, 3, and I'm good. I always want to be respectful when I talk about this, because resilience, I'll talk about tools. If I had a hammer and you'd never seen a hammer, and I say to you, this is a tool, here's how you hold it, and here's what you'll do with it. Well, you've never heard of a hammer, so you're learning like today. Maybe some of these tools that I share you might not have heard before. So they might seem unfamiliar. But I want to be careful is that, again, I don't want this to be a 1, 2, 3 and everything's fine. It's an ongoing process. We learn to apply and adapt and adjust as we go. And the more we use that tool, the more it becomes familiar and the more we get better at it. But initially, if I take a hammer home and I've never used one, I might have a sore thumb. But I get better as I work the tools and as I learn. So it's important to know that. It's not, like I said before, it's not just mental toughness, but it's working through the pain and the suffering that we might be involved in right now, or as I said, maybe memories of sufferings that we've had. So it's working it through. It doesn't eliminate the emotions that we feel. It gives us the ability to work through them. It's not about, as I said, just get over it. It's not about avoiding the hardship. It doesn't pluck us out of the difficulty. It helps us get through. This Chinese symbol of crisis, I love, because it acknowledges this is a crisis. There's danger, there's difficulty going on, but it's coupled with opportunity. It's an opportunity to gain new perspective, new meaning, and new purpose in the midst of suffering. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful symbol. So let's look at protective factors. I coined a phrase in my office that I use all the time, and it's the AAA. Acknowledge, accept, adjust. Well, what does that mean? Well, if I use my unfortunate medical situation that I went through, I got to the point where I realized after 7 surgeries, I got very discouraged because I loved hiking prior to that. I loved playing tennis prior to that, walking long walks, shopping in malls. And I had to acknowledge the reality that where my body was at that time after 7 surgeries was that I couldn't do that. I couldn't hike like I wanted or like I used to. I couldn't play tennis, and that can be very discouraging. And I realized that not only did I acknowledge the reality of where my body was at that moment, I've got to shift to now I need to accept it. Sometimes we can acknowledge the facts without accepting them. Yeah, that was a fact there, but I haven't accepted it as, you know what? This is the way it is for me right now, and I accept that. Let me tell you, if we stay just in, I'm accepting it, that would be very discouraging. I would continue to be discouraged. I would continue to be trying to live my life based off of a quality of life that I had defined prior to 7 surgeries. And I realized in order to adjust my mindset, I need to redefine what quality of life looks like. So for example, I acknowledge and accept the fact I can't hike the way I used to, as long as I could, or as steep as I once went or once wanted to. But I can now adjust my mindset to go, you know what? My quality of life, I'm going to redefine it so that I can reach it. If I keep that definition of quality of life, it's not realistic that I'll ever reach it. And what does that do? Discouragement, hopelessness, despair, frustration, because it's ever elusive. So in my mind, in my perception, I adjust how I look. So how I look at it. So I can still hike. I just can't hike as long, but I still get to enjoy all of the attributes of hiking. And I'm okay with that. I choose to be okay with that. Tennis, I don't play tennis anymore, but I play pickleball. And don't get me started on that sport because I love to play that game. So it's adjusting, not only physically adjusting, but really in our mindset. It's really an important acknowledge, accept, and adjust. It's important.
So Kendal, I'm gonna stop you because I think this is huge. It's easy. I think it's for most of us, it's easy to acknowledge the trauma, the hurt, whatever. When you get to the place of accepting, I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, because it is like, I can't accept that. It is just, it was too horrific, or it was too painful, that I can't accept what happened. So speak a little bit specifically to the acceptance piece on, are there any mantras, tools, things that will help us to let go of a lot of the stuff that's, for each of us, our trauma is different. but most people have some kind of trauma.
Yeah, and I tell you, I want to be a little careful when, you know, the word trauma can be, and not that we're doing this here, but the word trauma can be used all the time. And even as I defined it earlier, that if it's something that I have experienced in my life that was traumatic, where I was harmed, or I saw someone harmed, that for us to talk a little bit more about, oh, just accept it, I want to be so sensitive to that, because trauma can be triggered. Trauma, the memory of trauma or the experience of trauma literally sits in what we call our limbic system, where memory and emotion are held. And trauma can be triggered by the littlest things. I could have had a traumatic experience when I was 10. And now that I'm 60, I tell myself in my thinking mind, oh, I'm over that. It's not a big deal. But now all of a sudden something happens where a location or a person or maybe a movie, something reminds me of that, and my brain kicks into fight, flight, or freeze. The brain is meant to help us stay safe and to survive. So we need to understand the impact of trauma just on our brain, because in our thinking mind, we're like, oh, I'm past that. That was way back when. But the reality is trauma has a significant impact. The good news is once we recognize that and accept it, then we can adjust in getting help. So I don't want to go too far into trauma, to be honest. I want to be careful, because you're right, Blossom. All of us have had something of some nature, but some of us had it from an intense nature. And I want to be honorable and careful with that. So I don't know if that answers, other than I'm a little careful to go too deep into trauma. Other than, you know, it's important that we know it can be triggered. Now, I will use my medical issue as an example once again. That happened, you know, years later. I was in graduate school learning all of these things about how trauma impacts the brain, and the brain wants to kick in to help save you and protect you, even though that trauma isn't happening anymore. If it's triggered, the brain thinks it is. So your system, your adrenaline and everything, your breathing changes. And I was with one of my thesis partners, and she was taking me to the hospital just to get some scrubs, for an analogy that I was going to use. So she goes, here, I'll just take you down these stairs. So she took me downstairs to the surgery hall, where they do all the surgeries, which I did not know that's what that was. So when I go down those stairs and she opens the door, and I'm going to tell you guys right now, I can feel it in my body right now. It makes me, my throat kind of constrict. Why? Because those were 7 times. They were traumatic. And when I open those doors, take a breath, and I see this long, cold hall, and I see the lights and the gurneys. All of a sudden, I'm not consciously realizing what's happening, but this wave of heat hits me. It wasn't heat from the room, because it's a cold room. And I feel faint, and I hold myself up against the wall. And I'm asking, this is where, again, we ask ourselves, what am I feeling and why? And that's exactly what I asked myself. Wait a minute, what is going on? I feel, you know, I feel scared. I feel nervous. I feel unsafe. What is going on? Then I realized, oh, wait a minute. It's a trigger from a traumatic experience. My brain's trying to kick in. Hey, it's happening again. You got to get safe. So what I'm able to do when I get triggered is I identify it. And now I'm able to say, okay, it's just a trigger. I'm safe now. I have control. It's okay. Take some breaths. It's what I call self-talk. So sorry, but that's a long, a long answer to that. So important to recognize what am I feeling and why, and to come to that acceptance piece of, okay, I can accept not only is that a trigger, but I can also accept the fact that things have changed in my body, and I'm going to choose to be okay with that and redefine what can I do with my body. I might, if I focus on what I couldn't do, that'll keep me down. Does that help, Blossom, or is that a long, just the trauma pieces? Is that a thumbs up? Okay. All right, real quick. The internal factors in regards to resilience factors or protective factors, there's a flexibility piece, and some of us have it, some of us don't, but we can learn and grow in it. And just again, that coping emotionally is a big deal. And of course, we already talked about acceptance and then the adjustment piece. External factors, supportive relationships. I'm telling you guys, that is the #1 factor. Whether it's a child that's enduring trauma as we speak in an abusive situation, if that little buddy has one safe, strong, supportive individual in their lives, it boosts his ability to be resilient to endure the hardship that he's in. Big deal. Whether that's a coach, whether that's a parent, an aunt, a youth pastor, a neighbor. So even as adults, if we're going through a hard time, whatever that might be, having a support system is very important. And then the external piece of having meaning and purpose inspires us to get through. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'll even give some examples of some individuals. Okay. Quickly, that's the support network. Spirituality is the second protective factor. So if there's a piece of if I've got a support person or a support system and spirituality that gives me strength and encouragement and hope, those are very protective factors and helpful in regards to resilience. Sense of purpose and meaning, we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Risk factors, obviously, those make it harder. We can learn and adapt to unhealthy ways to cope with hardship and difficulty. Again, this emotional dysregulation, what that means is I'm going to have a flood of emotion when I'm dealing with hardship, difficulty, adversity. Floods of emotion come. I don't want to be afraid of it, and I still have to express it, but I'm able to regulate it. And if there's a dysregulation and it's just everywhere, then it's more of a risk factor. If I can regulate it. Now I'm telling you, it's not about not feeling it, the panic, the fear, whatever it is that I'm feeling. It's about being able to regulate it so it's not just all over the board. Here's one of the main tools, and bear with me because it's important. And again, Blossom, you're welcome to interact or interject in any time. But this is a description of human behavior, and this is what all the literature will encourage us to learn and grow in, these tools of how do I maintain or improve my perspective and my mindset about what is going on in my life or what has happened in my life, or the fear of what will happen. So the think, feel, do, human behavior. What I think precipitates how I feel, brings about what I do, my choices, my actions, and really what I believe and what I say. What am I saying out of my mouth? What am I believing about myself in context of what's going on? If I convince myself that I can make it through, or am I convincing myself I'm doomed? And again, another example, personal example, that again, just for application, I'm in 7th grade. And again, this doesn't matter time, however, whatever age we do this. But 7th grade, I'm experiencing something difficult and challenging, and it was trying to do my math. I couldn't get it. And I have a flood of emotion of anger and frustration and just not getting it. Realize we have tens of thousands of thoughts a day. I don't have the exact number, but I think it's about 20 to 30,000. Don't quote me on it. I haven't looked it up recently, but we have a lot, and they just kind of come and they go. But there are those that go a little slower and they stick. And how those stick is we fill in the blank. We have something happening and we will say something as the nature of, like with me in the school, I'm not getting my math. That must mean blank about me. And we conclude or we assume. So what I concluded was, oh, well, that must mean I'm stupid. And that stuck here and here. I believed it. And now what happens is my thoughts create a dialogue and a pattern of thinking that feed that core belief, negative core belief that I'm stupid. And it was based from a negative experience. I filled in the blank and it just took off. So, for example, by the time I get to high school, the thought process in my head is, you better not take hard classes. You'll fail. You won't graduate. Your friends will make fun of you. Your parents will be upset. And on down goes what I call the brain train, and it goes fast. And it all started with a conclusion I made that was faulty and negative, and I didn't have the skills or the tools to go, whoa, wait a minute here. Whoever said that I was stupid? I just thought it and I believed it. So now I can challenge that to go, I'm going to replace it with something that's more truthful. Now, with me, my spirituality is a big, big part of my life. So I can draw some truths from my belief system to say, wait a minute. The truth to me is God doesn't make stupid. So I've believed a lie, and now I get to choose to change how I fill in that blank. So, for example, the actual event happened. I didn't get my math. Math was hard. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So that's the sentence. But what I fill in now isn't, it's because I'm stupid. It's because I'm not that great at math, and I'm okay with that. So there's a choice to say, I'm not that great at it. Okay, period. It's a big deal on how we control these negative thought cycles, because when we are in a hardship and we're entertaining all of these thoughts of life is going to end, it's never going to get better, how am I going to do it? It just puts us in a big funk. And guess what? I say us because I'm human too. It's human nature. So in order to replace the anxious negative thoughts, takes time. Remember, hammer, takes time to utilize those tools before they can become effective like they were intended. Know this, 96% of the things we worry about don't happen. And the other 4%, when it does happen, the studies show we're able to endure it. So all those thoughts of fear and anxiety, and listen, I know it's real. I help people every day. Anxiety is a real thing. It's not just, oh, get over it. There are tools and things to apply and practice and developing the support system and the protective factors. So important things. Mindset is a big deal. If you guys have a piece of paper, if you can roll it up for me, I've got a paper towel holder. This is called what I call myopic vision. If you just roll it up to the point where all you can see is just one thing in your room. And so if I'm looking at what I'm focusing on is, let's say it's a vase and it's cracked and the water's leaking and the flowers are dead. But because I'm just looking at that, that's all I see. What do you think I'm going to start thinking? Because I'm focusing just on the negative. I'm focusing on, uh-oh, this is bad, it's happening. But if we pull back and you look at the full room, you realize, yes, there is a vase that's cracked, that's leaking water and has dead flowers in it. And yes, I do need to acknowledge that. But I can recognize there's a whole lot more going on in this room. Perspective is key to resilience. It's the shift of mindset and the shift of focus. So I have a question for you. Is this kitty cat confident or deceived? Perspective. I'm going to say confident. It's kind of that, is the glass half full or is it half empty? And my comment would be, it's full. It's full of water and it's full of air. It's a matter of how we look at it. So you don't have to do this actually, but it's something that it's an activity that I like people to do. And sometimes I'll write it on my whiteboard with someone in my office. 3 columns. The first column will say what I don't know. The second column is what I do know. And then the third column is I'm thankful for. It's a gratitude column. Now, the first column, what I don't know. If we use COVID as an example, there's a lot of I don't knows in that column, specifically when COVID first started. Lots and lots of I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening. I don't know when this is going to be over. I don't know how bad it's going to get. Now, again, those are legitimate questions. We're not denying them. But if we stay focused on just the I don't knows, what is that going to do to our thoughts and our emotions? It's going to increase fear and anxiety. Some of us have a propensity toward anxiety. So if someone has a propensity toward anxiety and they stay focused on the news and on everything that was going on, changing all of the time, alarming, crisis, what does that do to someone's already high anxiety? Off the chart. But I'll be honest with you, I've had people in my office that never had a propensity toward anxiety and fear, and theirs is off the chart. So it's a matter of what are we focusing on? So this is what I would always tell people, and I tell myself this too. I apply this for me. Yeah, okay, we don't know. But let's shift to what do I know? Now again, I'm just doing me as an example. My faith, my spirituality is a critical part of how I endure and work towards resilience. And I'm not trying to push that. Please know that. Whatever you can do to say, what do I know? And I can focus on, even if it's just 2 or 3 things. I know God is for me. I know he's not against me. He's got my back. Whatever it is that's going to keep me focused there. Then I can shift over to say, what can I be thankful for? When COVID first hit and we had all the lockdowns, how do I shift to be thankful for something? Well, I can be thankful that my son worked here remote. My son was talking to some country. My husband was talking to someone in another state, and I was in the other room doing telehealth. And at lunchtime, I could be thankful because on a sunny, in the springtime, we went outside and had lunch together. So it's recognizing I can be thankful for these things, even when this is screaming at me. When it screams and it pulls us down, we want to refocus, recalibrate. What do I know? And what can I be thankful for? That's a really helpful tool. Review real quick. Reframe setbacks as opportunities for growth, just as the Chinese symbolize crisis. Recognizing when I say faulty assumption, basically means reframing. So if you have a frame, this is an example you can do as well. If something tragic happened, let's say I lost my job, I got fired. Now, if I have this negative core belief that I'm no good or I can't do anything right, then these attached meanings that I would put on the frame would be, I'm a failure, I'm never going to have a job, I'm going to lose my house. It's again, another example of the brain train. So the actual event has happened. We can't deny, we have to acknowledge and accept the fact, hey, I don't have a job. But if I'm able to turn my perspective and say, what have I attached to that? What meanings have I framed around that experience? Because guess what? You get to decide how you frame your picture. And if you don't like a picture the way it's framed, changing a frame can really change how the picture looks. So again, it goes back to mindset, focus, perspective, and what am I attaching to it? And am I willing to choose to attach something different? Realize, you guys, that adversity, hardship, trauma, by nature, these things that are difficult take away this sense of choice and control in our lives. And anytime that happens, we feel panicked. Think about how COVID threatened or took away, at least temporarily, choices and a sense of control in our life. And it's very unsettling for all of us, and for some even more so. Because as humans, we have that sense of choice and control. So we get to decide, what are we choosing? Here's the Japanese art of fixing broken pottery. And again, I think it's called kintsugi, if I'm saying the G word right. Beautiful example of our brokenness, that there's beauty even in something that's broken. And they thread this beautiful golden paint epoxy that puts the piece back together, but it doesn't deny or disguise the brokenness. It gives a different perspective of the beauty, even in the midst that the piece might look a little different, but it's beautiful. There's times when people will say, you know, yesterday was good. And I say, all right, let's look at it from the perspective of, I can be honest to say, yesterday was good, but I'm choosing not to say today is bad. I want to say, okay, yesterday was good. And to be honest, today isn't as good. But there's good in every day if I'm willing to look for it and find it. There's beauty and good in it. That's the perspective we look that helps build resilience. I'm going to wait on this. How are we doing on time, Kai?
Great. We have about 12 minutes.
Okay, so we have a few more minutes. Okay. Yeah. Is there more interjection you want to do, Blossom, in regards questions or things that you want to do before I have just a couple more slides, but I want to.
I'm just curious with the people that are participating today. What are your biggest, Kendal talked about the different tools of refocus, recenter, think, feel, do, say, believe, reframing faulty assumptions, and gaining control over negative thought cycles. Is there any one of those that you feel like you've got a really good handle on? And if you do, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing how you got there. Because I think when we share how we've strengthened something in our own lives, it encourages others.
Well, I could say that I could have used Kendal 20 years ago, because I'm a high anxiety person. And so a lot of the stuff she's talking about, I kind of feel like I fumbled my way through starting to learn. But one of the things that I kind of had to start learning is it was okay to give up. I would basically, get into these situations at work, whether it's being pushed on me or, I'd be like, okay, I think we can do that. And then all of a sudden it's like, you're like, oh no, this is just going to take forever. And then I just end up pushing myself to work until midnight instead of going. Sometimes it's like, hey guys, I'm sorry, I thought we could do this, but it's going to take longer. But it was a weird thing, because to me it was a little counterintuitive that it's okay to give up. And then calm down. And then once you're calmer, you actually get through things faster and look for other solutions. But it just felt like, wow, I don't have to live like this.
Well, it's kind of like part of you're honoring yourself to set that boundary, that it's okay to say no, or it's okay to say, I can't do that.
Right. Just because I'm saying no, I'm not necessarily letting somebody down, but that's kind of the way I was taking it. So, I mean, it's still a constant struggle for me. It's something like you brought up triggers. I really had to learn that I have to be a lot more careful in what I'm willing to accept or say, but.
Which is a great example, Erica, of recognizing what are my triggers. And again, there's that mindfulness piece of really just honoring yourself and recognizing this is what I can do, this is what I can't do, and I can be okay with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mindfulness, I've only been aware of it for like the last year, but I've actually found that to be kind of helpful. Is slow down. It's okay to fail. In fact, it's not really failure. That's just the baloney you're putting on it,
Bingo. Yeah. You're framing around it. There's another, that old saying of sometimes you win. And, and if I said, everybody fill in the blank, sometimes you, and so we would all say lose. But again, perspective is sometimes you win and sometimes you learn.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different attached meaning. Yeah.
I practiced gratitude. Through a traumatic experience, I had to see a counselor. And at first, when she told me to, try doing like a gratitude journal, I think I had always kind of been like a thankful person, But I was kind of irritated, I won't lie, when she told me to do a gratitude journal. I'm like, oh my gosh, one more thing, you know, this is like homework. And it slowly turned from just practicing gratitude in general to finding things that I'm grateful for within that specific like traumatic experience. And that was really, really hard. And sometimes it is still a little bit hard, but it has really helped me to just like be okay and come to like acknowledging and accepting, you know, like an experience. So I don't know, that it helped me, although it was very, very hard.
So one other thing I would add, and I don't know, Kendall, you might have insight into this. I wouldn't say that for most of my life, people, you know, the feedback you get from people is that, oh, Eric, you know, Eric's a nice person. He likes to help, all this stuff. So I wouldn't say that I'm like mean, but I have to be honest. I noticed that when I started cutting myself a break, it was easier to cut other people a break. You know what I mean? The negative thoughts I had about other people, I'd mostly just leave in my own head, you know, because it's like, oh, that's not fair to them. But at the same token, to be honest, when you're really hard on yourself, you also tend to then project that onto others. So, oh.
That's good. That's one thing. I've got Fred Rogers here on the screen, and something that he said: the three steps to success. Number one, be kind, and number two, be kind, and number three, be kind. And kind to yourself is, and then you have more freedom to be kind to others. Yeah.
Kendall, are we all control freaks?
Why?
No, I mean, because we tend, I don't know if it's a more female trait than a male trait, but we all try to control as much as possible around us. Is that just normal, or is it not normal?
Well, I wouldn't call us control freaks, because having a sense of control is a lot different than being controlling. And a sense of control meaning I have choice. I have choice of, you know, we'll talk, if I have time, I'll mention Viktor Frankl. I don't know if anybody's heard of Viktor Frankl. Matter of fact, let me show you his picture. He's a Holocaust survivor, and he was a neurologist and a psychologist. And of course, he endured tremendous, obvious hardship, trauma. And he realized that everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, and that's the last of human freedoms, is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So he's in the midst of this, but he's choosing to have control. See, because if we have a choice, then there's a sense of control. It's not, there's a difference. And I want to clarify that. Being controlling, you know, and I won't get into all what's behind that, probably anxiety, probably some insecurities that we might have. But again, I'm not here to diagnose people. But it's recognizing that even in the hardest part, I still have a sense of control by choosing how am I going to react. I can't control what someone does to me, but I can control what I do with what someone does to me. Make sense? Okay. Real quick too, Viktor Frankl, he has a book called Man's Search for Meaning. I would highly recommend it in regards to, it'll really expound on how he survived the Holocaust, how he survived concentration camp. And he created this little equation that despair equals suffering minus meaning. He worked it in his book. He's got all kinds of quotes, but it's so important because he says he found that those in the concentration camp who did not lose their sense of purpose and meaning in life were able to survive longer. Purpose and meaning is key. And how do you do that when you're living in a concentration camp? Where do you find meaning? Part of his meaning and purpose was to project himself outside, ahead of this, on the other side of it, being able to help others that might be enduring in a hardship. That can be a sense of purpose and meaning to get through the hardship. Very successful at that. And one more guy, Stephen Hawking. This was amazing to me too. You talk about resilience. I assume you've all heard of him, but he was that theoretical physicist, and he was a cosmologist, meaning he studied the universe. And he came down with a disease called Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS. And it's a devastating, degenerative, horrible disease. And upon diagnosis, the body just shuts down. They're unable to they won't be able to walk. They lose bodily functions. They lose eventually the ability to breathe, to talk, to eat, and even sometimes cognitive decline. It's a horrible disease. He was diagnosed with it. Again, the expectancy is 2 to 5 years, and after 5 years, it plummets in regards to people living through. He lived for 50 years with that disease. And it had a lot to do with, no matter how his perspective, no matter how bad life may seem, there was always something you can do to succeed at. And his purpose and his meaning in life was to continue his studies on trying to figure out the universe. He was uber smart. Here's his quote. Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. To never give up work. Work gives you meaning and purpose, and life is empty without it. That's what kept him going. That was his purpose and his meaning in life. That made him resilient to a disease for sure, and all the challenges that came with it. So that's, I had a video. I don't know if we have time for it. Do we have time? We don't.
We're just about wrapping up.
We might not have time, and that's fine.
We can send it out with the follow-up.
Yep.
Sure, absolutely. And I'll just give you a quick. It's a video of it's a song, but it's a story of a man who endured some incredibly physical and medical issues, and how what was it that made him resilient? It's pretty powerful, actually. So it'd be a good something to watch. So I know everybody's got to get back to lunch or back to work, I guess. This is lunch, right? At least for those of us over here. Those of you there have the rest of the day in Hawaii, so whatever.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, Kendal, for leading our breakthrough series for
My pleasure.
February. Does anybody have any other questions for her before we close? No? So our next event is scheduled for March 17th. The registration is open on our website if you're interested in checking that out. We will be sending a follow-up email after this event, if not today or this afternoon, tomorrow. Hopefully we can get this video or the recording up onto our YouTube channel shortly if you want to share it with others. If you have, like I said, if you have any other questions, feel free to ask, or you can send us an email at info@idahopartnersforgood.org. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.